Now? Yep. All right, now the assignment is, what are your greatest accomplishments? Number one, first greatest accomplishment is 3 perfect daughters. Yay! Love my girls, and they all live in Roanoke, and they all gave me grandchildren. So that's a wonderful accomplishment or achievement. Next achievement, I think, I was a very poor student most of the way. So when I was 49, I asked, are you really stupid? Are you a poor student? So I went to Hollins and I graduated when I was 49. And I had the right direction. I studied art. So I'm a painter and I'm a calligrapher. And I've done a whole lot of volunteer work in the Roanoke Valley. One achievement is 20-some years with Carilion Clinic Hospice. Thank you. I'm still doing a little hospice work. It's been most gratifying. And I love to do calligraphy and I love to do painting. Those are things that came out of my art. And I won't go on with anything else I can think of right now. But if you ever want to know more accomplishments, I'll try to dream them up. Thanks. Bye.
Okay. I was a journalism major at Colorado and graduated in the mid-1950s. And every job I had thereafter, it was a job in which no woman had ever held. And my final job was vice president of Pennzoil Company in Houston. I was the first woman to be a corporate vice president there. But throughout my campaign, my career, I kept hearing, if I was meeting with a bunch of men and I offered some comment on some issue we were working on, invariably one of the men would look at me and say, you know, that's really good. You know, you think like a man. So I went through my career being praised for thinking like a man.
Right. Now, well, I think my greatest accomplishment was the final position that I had. I was a college professor in an area that had been largely dominated by men. I was in administration and I was the dean, and out of 9 colleges, I was the only woman dean. Now, what happened to me at that point, though, was that a decision was made that the College of Education and my College of Human Resources would merge. And it was made at a decision higher up. We didn't really have an opportunity to take a vote. So my challenge was bringing these 2 colleges together, and so that they could work together. And that took some doing, because both the faculty of both colleges felt somewhat like ownership to their college, and they wanted to always be that way. But we worked through a lot of things of saying, you know, we can make this work together. It can be better together. And I think we had everybody then finally working together. This process took about 2 years. So that was one of my major accomplishments. And I would also say probably just reaching out to college students in my career. I just really enjoyed it, and beyond the classroom of talking to them and teaching them and reaching to them, getting them set up in their careers, that was also a lot of fun. Also, I've been a major officer in Rotary. Now, Rotary started out as a men's-only organization, and there was a lawsuit when some women decided to join Rotary in the 1980s. There was a lawsuit, and anyway, finally, guess who won? So now Rotary is a combination of men and women all working towards the same thing, and that is, I guess, is our service. Our service particularly to families, to children, to maternal health, to environment, in all many, many ways. And it's an organization I really feel very close to. In that organization also, I was one of the first 3 women district governors. Now it's not such a big deal for there to be women district governors. In fact, the one now and the next 3 are all women. So that has changed. But we're not really paying that much attention at all to gender. Gender was an important issue in the 1980s, but that's changed, and now it's just all of us working together, particularly for children and those that are in need of health care. And so it's been a really very very special time to be a Rotarian and to work towards all these areas. So those are, I would say, I can kind of sum it up into 2 things.
Okay, you want to know about my most wonderful achievement in life? Okay, I was going to tell you that would be by far all of my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They have been the most joy in my life, and they are all, I have 5 children, 11 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren. They're all happy, healthy, and just have a happy life and everything that you would want them to be. They've been successful in their careers, and it just has been, I was an only child, and I always wanted to have a big family. So the good Lord gave me that, and that's my happiest achievement.
My greatest achievement? Somehow or other, if I talk to people, they'll say, "You're that old?" And I think, boy, I must have achieved something, even if it's longevity.
I guess in looking back, the thing that has sustained me the most has been my spiritual life, which seems to have evolved, and also my art connection with painters and art classes and doing art. As I'm here at Brandon Oaks, and I don't have the energy or whatever it takes to do the big paintings on easel like this one. This one was done on the floor, but I've started doing smaller things like Zen doodles, and that satisfies me. I just do it and I'm lost.
Ready?
Yep.
All right, my greatest accomplishments are 2 little red-headed daughters who are not little anymore. They're both grown women of their own, but they're still precious, and they still have their red hair, and we've had lots of fun talking about and kidding about our red hair. And one funny thing, we're talking about gardening now. When they were little, I tried to teach them to garden. I worked at it, but I would put them at a place in the garden, and they'd be working, I would turn around, they would be gone. They flew away. But now they are both serious gardeners. So I guess it goes on and on and on.
Yep. Okay. All right, I just want to tell you that when I first went to my doctoral college, it was at the University of Michigan, I got a piano teacher there who had 8 students. There were 2 gals and 6 boys. And the other gal and I discovered that he didn't think women could play. And he didn't think we had enough strength, we didn't have enough power, whatever. And so our goal was to prove him wrong, which thankfully we did, because, or at least I did. There was another professor there who was a band director who had asked me to please play a concerto with the band, with the wind ensemble. And I didn't tell my teacher about it. And when he found out, he said, "Oh, you can't do that." And I decided, of course, to prove him wrong, which I did. Not only did I play extremely well, but I did the whole thing memorized, which people don't usually do. And I was just really thrilled with that whole thing. So I proved him wrong. So that's my story.
I was widowed the first time when I was 41 years old. And living in Manhattan, where we lived, I had to go to work. And finding a job wasn't always easy, especially in the 1960s and 70s. So I had a friend who offered me a job in the hotel business, being an assistant manager, and I knew nothing about the hotel business. So I thanked him very much, but said I didn't think he really, when he thought about it, would want me for the job. But he said he did. He wanted me to be an assistant manager who took care of all the VIPs and people who came to the United Nations, which was a wonderful job. But then he went on to say that I had to understand that women were not in the front of the house in the hotel business. They were either second or third person in the sales department, they were telephone operators, and they were executive housekeepers and the maids and so forth. So this would be something new, but he felt he wanted to try it. And he said, was I willing, knowing that the men who were the assistant managers would not take kindly? And I said, yes, I was anxious to get a job. And then he said, now I'll have to pay you $25 less a week than I pay the men, or they wouldn't understand. And again, I said yes, not realizing that that was really against the law. So I went to work, and I loved it. And he was quite a mentor. So after I'd been there about 6 months, he called me to the office, and I thought, oh, what have I done wrong? And he said, I think you're a natural. I want you to go through the entire process, and I will help you. And also, Cornell University had a hotel school, and they were offering courses in New York City at night at the Hotel Association offices. He said, I think you should apply. And I did, and I was accepted. So I went to work all day, and then I went to school 3 nights a week, and then studied the other nights. In the meantime, he put me in charge of every department within the hotel. I don't think everybody liked it, because some of the men certainly, especially in the food and beverage, they had been in the business for a long time. But we began to get along very well. They realized that a woman in that capacity was not there to take their job away from them, really. I was just learning the job. So I went through every department, worked up. And finally, after 9 years in that particular hotel, they were looking to take one of the assistant managers and make them the assistant general manager. And what I wanted more than anything else was to be the general manager of my own hotel. And I knew that this would be an opportunity that I really shouldn't goof up. So the 3 of us, 2 men and myself, went to breakfast with the president and a few of the officers. And I must say I was so nervous that I didn't eat breakfast. And the president sat next to me, and he said, my name was Hamilton at the time. He said, Mrs. Hamilton, you're not eating breakfast. And I said, I don't eat breakfast, sir. Now that was the biggest lie ever, because breakfast is my favorite meal. And I thought, why did I do that? Now I'll never get the job because I lied about it. Anyway, to my office. And 2 days later, the assistant to the president came, and he said, Mrs. Hamilton, you're the most qualified of the 3 of you, but unfortunately, you're a woman. And I thought, I don't believe this. And he said, we just can't offer it to you. Women are not general managers of hotels. And without thinking another thought, I found myself saying, what is one of the reasons why I couldn't be the manager? And he thought a minute, and then he said, well, sometimes if everybody's busy and there was a drunk in the bar, the general manager might have to go and help the bartender get him out of there. And we just don't think you could do that. And I thought, boy, that's a great question. So I said, well, let me tell you something. If you were here and a drunk was in the bar, you would probably walk in, tap him on the shoulder and say, you've been cut off, fella. It's time that you left the bar. And if he was really in a bad mood, he might haul off and sock you one, and you'd have a little fight in the bar. And how would that look in the newspaper? We're a very respectable hotel. Now I said, if I was here, I would get the word and I would ask the security men to wait at the front door. I would go into the bar, I'd walk up to him, I'd slip my arm through his, and I'd whisper in his ear, honey, why don't you and I get out of here? And 9 times out of 10, he'd get off the stool, we'd walk through the lobby and out the front door, and the servicemen would put him in a taxi and send him home. And he looked at me and he said, I'll be back. And he left my office, and 2 days later I had the job. So I thought, no, I've just got one more step to go. But I had a wonderful time. And then 18 months later, I got a call asking me to be general manager of a hotel in New York. And it was the first time that a woman had been asked to be the manager of a hotel in New York. And I don't know about the rest of the country, but I was just interested in New York. And about 20 years later, my son was at a meeting, and this lady and he were talking. And it was in a new hotel, and she turned out to be the manager of the hotel. And David and she were talking about hotels, and she said to him, you seem to know a lot about hotels. And he said, oh, my mother was once a manager of a hotel here in New York. And she looked at his name tag and she said, Hamilton, are you related to Doreen Hamilton? And he said, she's my mother. And she handed him her card and she said, if your mother comes back to town, would you please let me meet her? She broke the glass ceiling for the rest of us. And we women who are general managers of hotels in New York now have her to thank. And I had never thought of that before, because the term breaking the glass ceiling had never, ever appeared in anybody's conversation in 1969, 1970, and even into the early 1980s. So I think that's what I'm most proud of, that women were able to come into the hotel business, as they should have, because they've made wonderful general managers.
Yep. I'm June Poe, and I've had many exciting experiences in my 96 years. First, though, I want to thank God for giving me life as a woman and being with me throughout my life, all the way. Now, I've been a domestic engineer for my family, my mother, as a mother and a wife and grandmother and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I've also been a domestic engineer living in 14 different homes. Then I've also been a professional engineer. In my professional life, I was a psychiatric social worker in the field of serious mental illness, or as we call them now, brain disorders. Now, I've been also blessed to have good education and wonderful women role models and rich opportunities to advocate for important changes. Now, if you want to know more about me, a fulfilled woman, just read my story, Never Walk Alone, which is in the library.
Well, it's a kind of a story. As you know, I was a professional church educator for the Presbyterian Church in New Jersey, working first in a local church and then with the Presbytery as associate executive. Presbyteries, you know, are a group of 66 churches that are supported and administered by the staff. So in 1998, churches were wrestling with the whole issue of sexual misconduct of pastors mostly, and they were having to prepare the ministers and the churches with a sexual misconduct policy to help them prevent these kinds of court cases. Well, it was my misfortune to have to explain to a large number of resistant, somewhat self-righteous, mostly male ministers that they were going to have to sign a document saying that they had never committed any type of sexual misconduct. They were furious. They were resentful, incensed, and downright angry that they would have to sign such a thing. And who was I to make them do that? Wasn't their word enough? They were men of the cloth, after all. Why did they have to do this? Well, I was totally unprepared for this response, but quietly listened to all that they had to say, mostly because I was at a loss for words. But I was surprisingly gratified that my listening seemed to be what they needed. Ultimately, all of them did sign it, and I learned something that day. I learned that sometimes listening is more effective than speaking. Well, I retired 2 years later and was so surprised that my presbytery nominated me to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Presbyterian Church Educators. The conference was going to be held in Vancouver, Canada. This was absolutely the highlight of my professional life, but it was also the scariest because it meant that I had to give an acceptance speech in front of hundreds of my peers. And it was scary, but it was definitely worth it.
Hi, I have been a teacher of music instruments for, I can't count the years, I'm not sure how many it's been, but I started in 1971, and I remember standing in front of a 4th grade class and having to talk to them and being nervous. That very quickly subsided because talking to a class 6 times a day and all week long made a lot of advancement in my ability to do that. As I went through the years of teaching, I found lots of different ways of doing things that helped children learn, and it wasn't always the same way for each child. And it was teaching in instrumental music, teaching violin, viola, cello, and I even had a couple bass students over the years. In elementary school, I taught 1 year in a high school and really missed the elementary age, so I went back to it after that. And then by the time I finished teaching, well, let me say before I say that when I started teaching in Fairfax County's public schools, I would teach a few kids in the teacher's lunchroom or in the hallway, which really wasn't allowed, but we worked on it somehow. And all these little nooks and crannies of the school, because they didn't have any place for someone to teach a child to play the instruments. But over the years it got better and better, and the classes of students grew from 1 or 2 at a time to maybe 20 at a time. And then I wanted to say that by the time I finished my teaching years and retired, I had taught hundreds and hundreds of students, passed many of them on to better, more advanced teachers, and some of those students have had accomplishments of playing in an orchestra in Florence, Italy, and another one is in Switzerland and with her husband from there, and she has had instances of teaching, so that's far-reaching. It's just interesting to me to see how many students have done something with what I taught them. And by the time I finished all of those years, I had taught so many students. And the very last year, I had over 300 students that I taught every week as a recurring lesson, week after week, of course. And that's about it.
I guess I taught and was an administrator of sorts for around 30 years at Radford University. I got a PhD from Ohio State University, and I had done my undergraduate work at Radford. This is way back in the dark ages, but so I got, after I finished my undergraduate degree at Radford, I got a fellowship to go to graduate school, and I went to Ohio State. Got my master's and PhD there, and then actually came back to Radford, and was there ever since. In 1995, I married a man from New Zealand who had been a faculty member at the veterinary school. He was a department head there. And when we retired, we moved to New Zealand, which was where he was from, and his had brothers and a sister, and his children, his adult children at that time, lived in New Zealand, but they promptly moved to Australia, so we did not move to Australia.
Tell me about the conference you did there.
I lived in Radford. I had belonged to the American Association of University Women, the AAUW, and when I went to New Zealand, of course, one of the things I did was to look up the New Zealand version of it, which is called the New Zealand Federation of Graduate Women, for the purpose of meeting some women of common interest. And it turned out they had quite a lively chapter in the town where I lived, which was a suburb of Auckland. And I just got involved in it. I got recruited to do their newsletter, and I'm not sure why that happened, but I've obviously been recruited to work with the Acorn here. Mm-hmm. So I worked with that and wound up being national president, which is not that big a deal, you know. It's a small country and a small organization. It's like being the Roanoke Valley, New River Valley president of an organization. So the New Zealand Federation of Graduate Women has as its purpose to encourage women to do graduate work. Mm-hmm. And at their work partly the fundraising part was by renting a graduation regalia to the various universities there. So we did that once a year. We were paid for it, and we used that money for fellowships for women to go to graduate school, either in New Zealand, or a lot of them wanted to go to England to do their graduate work, the ones who did. So what else about them? We had the usual monthly meetings, and we had a national conference. Eventually it became the turn of our region, which included Auckland and some other little places, to host the national conference. And because at that time I was the president, and all the officers were from our little area, so we could work together easily, we had the job of doing the conference. And that's the experience I was talking about earlier. In some respects different from the AAUW here. They have much more of an international focus. There's an international organization called the International Federation of University Women, and that encourages women, particularly in what we call third world countries, to get education.
Probably, I think my greatest achievement was after getting married after 2 years of college and raising 3 boys until they were in school, going back to school and finishing my education in something quite different from what I started out in, and enjoying being there so much that I started out in pre-med. I had 2 years of pre-med, and then got my bachelor's degree at Hollins after commuting 50 miles each way 2 or 3 times a week for 3 years to finish up and getting my bachelor's degree in music. And then I loved it so much that I took a year off and then went back and spent the next 5 years working towards my Master of Arts in Liberal Studies, also in music. And probably the crowning glory of that was my master's thesis, which instead of writing something, I constructed a harpsichord from a kit and gave a recital on it. And that was my thesis for my master's degree. So I felt as though that was quite an accomplishment. And I'll be talking more about that in it's called, I guess, Reflections now, in April. I'll be telling more about the construction of the harpsichord at that time.
It was 1967, and I had been in the same church job for 5 years, and I wasn't too happy there, so I was looking for a new job. And I learned of a church near my home that was looking for a new organist choir director, so I applied. And I was told that there were already 2 candidates who were men, and they didn't think my chances were too good. But luckily, the minister had appointed a search committee to choose the new choir director. So that gave me a slight advantage. I competed against 2 men, and I got the job. And about 2 weeks later, I had a letter in the mail from a member of the church, and he said that he was at first very opposed to having a woman as a choir director because he didn't think a woman could control the children in the junior choir. And I proved him wrong, which I'm glad to say that I did. And I ended up staying in that position for 34 years and was very happy and developed several junior choirs and small children's choirs, and worked also with the adults and had a beautiful organ to play, which made me very happy.
Well, you know, I was so surprised and happy to know that we have an International Women's Day. After all, we're half of the world's population. We're problem solvers, we're caring people, we share, we do all the things to make life special every day. So I say, have a wonderful International Women's Day.